I love Harry's discussion here about behaviors. I'll add an example to the conversation here. Being private equity investors, we were the privileged equity investor from a controlling perspective in a business based here in New Jersey about 3 years ago. Business is about $200 million in sales, started by a MIT engineer and in the telecommunications space, in the telecom space. This individual built a business from nothing to 200 million, was looking for his first monetization event, and we came along and partnered up with him. Part of our investment thesis there was to do some tuck-in acquisitions to augment the capability that they had. And one of the deficiencies in the business was that the business was highly East Coast concentrated. And so after about 6 or 9 months, we identified a target. Lo and behold, it was in California. A business also created by an owner-founder, except he wasn't an engineer and he didn't go to MIT. He was a sales guy and he went to Sacramento State University. And he built his business to a $100 million business, primarily on the West Coast. His culture in his business on the West Coast was West Coast, very casual, very informal, very sales-driven. And the owner-founder here on the East Coast was quite the converse. Bringing these two businesses together provided a lot of economic value, not only from a technology point of view, but from a geographic coverage point of view, et cetera, but we clearly had quite a cultural dilemma over here, as you can well imagine. So that's a little bit about the setup that we had and the complication in this particular cultural behavioral model that we were dealing with. We were able to consummate a deal between these two companies, and for the past 18 months, with tremendous success but a lot of discipline, we've been working at integrating these businesses. So when you talk about, Harry talks here about the behavior, you can imagine the West Coast business headquartered in LA. Just close your eyes and imagine casual, ping pong table, vending machine, food. You come out to the New Jersey business, there isn't even a vending machine where you can get a Coke, let alone a cup of coffee. Bring your own coffee, and by the way, go out and get your own lunch. But I think the most fascinating thing in this particular situation from a behavioral perspective was the East Coast business was technology driven. The technicians, the engineers, the R&D guys drove that business with tremendous support to the sales guys who executed sales. The guys on the West Coast, on the other hand, had powerful sales guys, gregarious, big personalities, went out there, hunted elephants, closed those elephants, threw them over to the tech guys who somehow made it happen. Okay, so two very different cultures in that respect. Part of the cultural integration that we went through was not just getting the sales team in a room and figuring out how this sales team and that sales team are going to work together, and getting the technology engineering guys in another room with their counterparts and figuring out how they were going to get to work together. But in fact, what we did is we took the sales guys, who were the dominant culture on the West Coast, with the engineering guys who had the dominant culture here on the East Coast, and put them in a room.
Walked out.
And locked the door. And took the engineering guys from the West Coast and the sales guys from the East Coast and put them in the other room. And what we did is we went through a series of experiences of defining culture, value, behavior, and what's going to work. And got that established by the dominant, the alpha leaders, the alpha females, the alpha males who were leading their particular businesses, and then did the same thing with the followers who were supporting those individuals. And then we cross-pollinated. So then we took the two sales organizations, put them in a room, and these are not large groups of people. Sales overall is less than 80 people. Engineering is a little bit bigger than that. But I think what happened over there was a couple of things when we think about the results. First of all, the CEO on the East Coast, whose business acquired, didn't merge, we acquired the other business, led from the front, unlike our president, if you excuse my disappointment there. He led from the front, and the CEO on the West Coast business agreed that he was not going to be the leader. He wanted to have a job, he wanted to remain in the business, He wanted to remain in sales, and he became the head of sales for the the West Coast. So first of all, you had the leadership aspect there. Secondly, you had a process that got put in place where people had to talk about culture, talk about behavior, define new culture, define new behavior. No doubt there were some people over the last 18 months who had the privilege of going to work at other companies, and we had the opportunity to bring in new talent to augment the existing talent, both on the engineering side and the sales side. And I don't mean to leave out all the back office operations, but that got put together, and unfortunately a lot of people came out of that. So where are we today with this particular investment? The EBITDA, we always have this expression, we'll put 1 + 1 and we'll make 3. Well, our bank investment case said 1 + 1 is 2. Our operating investment case was 1 + 1 is 3. And we're pretty close to 1 + 1 is 4 now, not quite fully at 4. There is a stable new culture, which is not necessarily a harmonization of both. It's the best of both. The behaviors reflect the best of both. The leader on the West Coast is extremely successful driving sales over there. The leader over here is very successful being the leader, the CEO of the entire business. And I'm headed from here out to Las Vegas to start working on the new acquisition that will bring this business new technology capability outside of the OEMs that they work with today.
Very good. Now, Mitch, you alluded to some of your integration challenges earlier in what you had to say. Can you talk some more about that from a cultural standpoint?
A little bit, yeah. First of all, Duran, I have an image of your blended culture of a bunch of folks with a jacket and tie, but down below where the video doesn't show anymore, they're wearing board shorts and they got their surfboards up against the wall. So hopefully you take the best of both and put it together. There's an interesting aspect to all of this, and that's timing. In our case, we did 4 acquisitions of the traditional businesses plus 2 technology acquisitions all in the space of a year. Our final one came in, and frankly, we brought them on board. They had very similar makeup to their counterparts in the traditional businesses. Our culture hadn't gelled yet. We still had 2 very separate cultures, if you will, approaches to the business, styles of doing business between the headquarters groups and the technology aspect of things, and then our traditional businesses. By bringing the 4th company in, we made things a lot more complicated because now we had another, I guess, 33% of work to do to integrate, and we also created a little more critical mass around the status quo. I think had we waited to get further along with the other acquisitions, solidify where we were going, and then brought the next piece in, it would have been a little simpler for us. And in fact, we've walked away from, or at least postponed, a couple of very attractive opportunities recently to give us a chance to finish the work that we're doing to establish the foundation. You always want to move really fast, get the thesis in place, bring in the revenue and so forth, but sometimes it pays to go a little bit slower so that you don't bring another, I guess, a rider who is going to provide distraction to your rowers, and all of a sudden you're just not moving ahead anymore.
Oh, very good. Well, now, one aspect, by the way, of changing cultures is to change the company to a whole different paradigm from what they were operating before. And Rick, you had an experience that I thought everyone would like to hear about on that.
Yeah, I'd like to share an example and make a point about the motivation for the journey. So I'll start with the metaphor of a burning platform. I started my career on an oil rig, so I understand that metaphor. And everyone should know 167 people died is the background of that metaphor. So it's a metaphor of fear. I've used it, we've all used it, right? But there is a better way. It takes a lot of work, but we need to work on the motivation for the change. And so the example I want to share is about being creative to engage everyone to embrace the change, or at least most everyone. Not everyone's going to go on the journey. So the experience I had was with a biotech firm that was moving from the clinical to the commercialization phase with a product that had tremendous promise. The challenge of that was that the product was fast-tracked and was going to be commercialized faster than they were going to have the production facility ready to produce the product. So what that meant is that they were going to launch this product from the research facility and have to supply the market from that research facility for 2 years at least. So the corporate team over this unit recognized that the scientists and the researchers, the technicians that ran this pilot facility, knew nothing about the demands of supplying a commercial market. But they had confidence, and they expressed that confidence very strongly to that team in the form of an investment for help, for coaches. And I'm not a big fan of coaches in a general sense, by the way, but I want to give an example of where I think that applied correctly, you can do great things. So the approach that we took, and I happen to be one of the coaches that went on this journey with this team, is we looked at this organization. There were about 65 people in it. There were 11 PhDs in the building. Everybody else had some sort of title that had the word scientist in it. Even if they were a technician running a stainless steel vat, they were a scientist. This was a group that was very heavily motivated by the science of what they were doing and had great pride in it. So we looked at the skill set that they had and what they were going to need to do. And the first thing that we realized was we needed to find a way to make them interested in taking this diversion in their career, because this was going to be a diversion. They didn't go to school and earn their PhD to run a production facility. So the way we positioned this journey with them was that it was going to be a career expanding journey. And we were going to help them be successful. And we were going to make it interesting. So we brought in a team of about 6 people that had true expertise in operations, production, regulatory compliance, quality, maintenance, those kinds of things. And we set up a loose sort of two-in-the-box structure with middle management and senior management of that facility, meaning that we had somebody that was essentially backstopping all of the key positions, someone that had 20, 15, 25 years of experience in those kind of roles. We then discussed with the employees that for this journey we were going to use the Harvard Business School case study approach. We did that on purpose because it intrigued them. That sounded very interesting. That sounded academic, okay? And we wrote case studies on how to run production facilities. I wrote many of the case studies, and we went out onto the production floor and we pulled papers from their production batches, and we used the names of their equipment, and we told compelling stories with no answers and challenged them to think deeply about how they would solve problems like a phone call in the middle of the night, like an FDA inspection, and so on. And so we had, with these case studies, we had these learning events. We also had daily production meetings. We had weekly production meetings. And importantly, we set up a set of metrics that represented the performance of all aspects of the organization. It was as much to drive the performance as it was to drive participation. And those metrics had to be presented to the corporate team once a month. So everybody was watching. In the beginning, the experts led these meetings daily, weekly, facilitated the presentation of the metrics, and it helped the person explaining it what it meant and reminded them for the first couple of presentations. After a while, we stepped back to participating rather than leading. And ultimately, we stepped back to monitoring. And after about 9 months, this group was running their facility. They had experienced quite a number of interesting lunch and learns and case study events. They'd experienced the pain of what it's like to actually run a plant 24/7 that has to supply against a production schedule. And they learned a lot of new skills, many of which they never really set out to learn or aspired to when they decided where they were going to go to school or what kind of job they were going to take. But we kept reminding them of this journey and how important it was. This was a life-saving drug. The game had an end point, right? They were going to have a commercial facility eventually. And this group had the future of knowing that they were going to gain skills that they could apply elsewhere in their career, either with the same company or if some of them chose to move on, that would be an outcome as well. And it was very successful. Within 3 years, the drug sold $1 billion in sales. Many of the participants in this adventure, a few stayed in production, actually. Many went back to R&D and scientific type roles, but now they had leadership skills. And instead of being an individual contributor, they were a team leader, or they had a career path in management. So my point with that example is really look hard for a positive motivation to change. Talk about the career expanding journey. You know, turnarounds are not fun, and they don't have a future state that is nearly as exciting as $1 billion in sales of a new product. But they are career expanding. You can learn a great deal. And if you explain and are very honest and truthful with how challenging it's going to be, and you explain what they're going to gain from that, and you give them the confidence that you're going to support them, they'll go with you. They'll go with you. And if they're not buying in the beginning, then you're having self-selection, okay? You'll find people are not going to be able to go on that journey. They're not interested in that career expanding period of time. And that's okay. It's good to know that up front and be honest with each other, and you have to have the right team in the front. But my point again is look for the positive motivation for the change.